This morning, I celebrated Mass for the Association of the Catholic Schools in the Diocese of Caloocan, and I thought I should share to you also what I shared to the academic communities that I celebrated for this morning. The late Filipino historian Renato Constantino once wrote an essay that became required reading for college students in English literature. The essay is entitled "The Miseducation of the Filipino." It engages the students as well as the teachers in an exercise in critical thinking, not just about the things that are taught in school, but about the process itself of education that people are made to go through in their schooling. This is to make sure that we don't allow schooling to be instrumentalized for the miseducation of our students. In the 1970s, I remember reading a book written by another scholar, more or less saying the same thing, warning us never to equate schooling with education. He was an Austrian Catholic priest specialized in sociology and the philosophy of education. And the book that I'm referring to is entitled "Deschooling Society." It created ripples in the world of the academe back in the last few decades of the second millennium. In that book, Ivan Illich speaks pejoratively of how schooling can turn into a conditioning of the mind that can make some individuals more difficult to educate. Ivan Illich, that is the name of the sociologist, suspects that practically every aspect of societal life has a tendency to become so schooled, meaning over-institutionalized, or if I may borrow from the vocabulary of computer technology, programmed baga, programmed. Sometimes, he says, we do not realize how our very perception of the world around us makes us unable to understand things, especially elements that are not within the scope of the lenses that we as learners are forced to wear or to view reality from. So what does this author suggest in order to address this anomaly? Well, he's advocating what he calls an exercise in de-schooling society by empowering the learners. And I had to remind the faculty members, the teachers who were present this morning, that we never stop being learners. Even when a teacher is graduated already, he or she should not stop being a fellow learner. Because the moment they stop learning, I do not think they can continue to be effective as teachers. And so, Ivan Illich advocates distancing ourselves from our own presuppositions. And for this to happen, he says it is important to be always open to alternative views and to keep ourselves disposed for a continuous and ongoing process of education. Sa lahat yata ng profession, there is the same concept of ongoing education. Our readings today are very relevant to the proper disposition for learning or the kind of atmosphere that people need in order to keep themselves open to the important lessons of life, not just inside the school setting, but in whatever circumstances or whatever situations we might find ourselves in. Education is never to be confined within the four walls of a school. Look, dahil sa pandemya, even if the schools are physically closed, education continues. Because you don't confine education to the buildings, to the four walls of the school. Education can and should happen at home, in a bus, in a jeepney, in the church, in a marketplace, in a mall, in an open field. It should happen in good times as well as in bad times. In our interactions with people, with nature, with its elements, with fellow creatures, and with the whole world around us. You know, Jesus was called a rabbi. And in Hebrew, that means a teacher. He was regarded as a teacher. But he stood out among the teachers in the Jewish society in his time because he had a unique approach to education. He never allowed his teaching to be limited or restricted to the synagogue. Kung ako'y teacher lang sa loob ng simbahan, I don't think I'm being true to Jesus because Jesus took advantage of every opportunity. He could create a learning environment wherever he found himself. On a boat, at table, on the road, on a lakeshore, on a hillside, etc. That is why I'm not surprised that people said that he was different in the way he taught. He taught with authority and not like the scribes and the Pharisees. You will know that education is at work when the learners are able to sift the grain from the chaff, sift the facts from the fake news, if we might modernize it. When the learners take time to verify, to do fact-checking or double-checking, and not just to take it all hook, line, and sinker. When they practice discernment before passing on a piece of information in the social media. When they ask questions having to do with meaning and value, with goal and purpose. When the learning process, instead of making them arrogant, makes them humble. Sa totoo lang, the more you know, the more you realize that you do not know a lot of things. That is why the truly knowledgeable people in this world are humble people. Learning makes us humble and motivates us to struggle to know even more. In our gospel today, Jesus speaks about a whole generation that is so easily swayed by popular or even populist opinions. It is so easy, says Jesus, for people to be carried away by the prevalent culture or mindset. It is so easy to be made to dance to the tune, to be pressured by expectations, to be made to behave according to convention rather than conviction. In this kind of setting, well, people like John the Baptist or even Jesus himself would be considered as anomalies. Sometimes I wonder why the first 5 books of the Bible were called the book of the law. The book of the law. In Hebrew, they are called the Torah, which does not exactly mean law. It means instruction. Sa Tagalog, ang katumbas ng Torah ay turo. Pagtuturo, instruction. Mas madaling tandaan, di ba? It is not just about following a set of rules and regulations. It is rather about being disposed to learn with God as our ultimate teacher. It is about imbibing not just knowledge but also prudence and wisdom. We know that in the past, the learning process has tended to be predominantly informative, yung tinatawag na banking system. In the age of digital technology that has revolutionized the students' access to information, this morning I warned the teachers. Ang sabi ko, if you limit your task to giving information, you will become irrelevant. Because your students today probably have greater access than you to information. Well, what the students today need is not just information, but the capacity to process information intelligently. Not just for them to be able to perform well. Because more than being informative and performative, I think good education should be transformative. Our psalm today, which is the very first of the 150 psalms of the Bible, is called a wisdom psalm. It makes a distinction between the wise and the foolish, between the learned and the stupid. It speaks about wisdom as a blessing that is at work in people who do not just go with the tide or are not just carried by the current. Hindi lang nagpapadala sa agos. They bother to ask questions like why, how come, according to whom, in what regard. Sabi ko sa mga teachers kanina, don't ever get intimidated or don't ever be insecure before the questions your students ask. Allow them to ask questions. In fact, if they ask intelligent questions, that should be a compliment to you. That students know what to accept and what to reject, whom to emulate as role models, and whom to be wary of. That they get to know how to choose their battles, how to bow like bamboos when a typhoon is passing by, and how to rise again after a fall. Well, my prayer is that we raise the next generation following the inspiration of today's song. We raise them like trees planted near running waters that yield their fruits in due season and whose leaves never fade.